Why don't you say something, Sam? You man can hear.
What? You bastard. He's disconnected. Are you connected? Well, how the hell are you? Pull your back.
Lecture S2, October 1st, 1962.
As emphasized last time, at a facility in several points of view. The reason is that in any real situation, the situation is fairly complicated to analyze, say, for one example, it may be too complicated to analyze directly by solving the differential equations. But you can still get a very good idea of what the behavior of the system is going to be if you have some feel for the character of the solutions under different circumstances. Ideas such as the field lines, ideas such as lumped condenses and resistors, or rather capacitors, resistors, and inductors, and so forth, are very useful. It is not possible to solve the Maxwell equations in all the circumstances exactly. And on the other hand, in presenting the subject of electricity and magnetism, none of the semi-physical models, such as field lines and so forth, are really adequate and accurate, precise, and simple, except the one abstract way of representing the laws, and that is by the differential equations. They have the advantage, therefore, of being fundamental, exact, as far as we know, and very precise. And there's nothing else to learn in the sense of something to unlearn if you've learned the differential equations. On the other hand, you will not be able to understand right away what should happen in different circumstances. You'll have to solve the equation. But it's much better to know something about the character of the solutions, and therefore we must also study the ideas of field lines and other concepts which are made to help to understand the equation. Therefore, today I'm going to begin with the abstract mathematical end of the theory of electricity and magnetism. The ultimate idea is to explain the meaning of the Maxwell equations. And in doing so, we find them written in a very peculiar notation with upside-down triangles and so on, and I have to explain what that is. And so I disregard completely the Maxwell equations and start to discuss the mathematics of vector fields. This will be of very great importance, not only for the Maxwell equations, but for all kinds of physical circumstances. You'll find the same things, the same writing, the same notation again and again. Just like the ordinary differential calculus is so important in all kinds of physics, and integral calculus likewise, so the differentiation of vectors is obviously an important matter. So I now turn to this subject. I've written on one board here a few facts from the theory of vectors, the algebra of vectors, and partial derivatives. Now, what's the problem? The first thing we're going to discuss is the simplest possible field, which is called a scalar field. By a field, you remember, we mean a number which depends upon positions in space. Of course, the number may change in time also, but that matter we don't have to worry about now. We'll talk about what it looks like at a given instant. Example. Suppose we take a solid block of material which has been heated at one end and cooled at the other one, and someone's hit it with a hammer and so on. So there are various heats generated inside in different places. And so the temperature of the body varies from point to point in a complicated way. Then the temperature will be a function of x, y, and z, the position in space in a three-dimensional system. So here's a position, a point in space, and the temperature varies as I move around, hotter here, cooler there. So what we mean by a scalar field is this: by a field, merely something that varies in position in space, and by a scalar field, that the thing which is varying in position in space is a scalar. And we have an example of the temperature. Now we have another idea, which is a vector field, and I'll give an example of such a thing. And the idea is very simple. It's some vector. A vector, however, which is different in different places. As an example, you have a rotating body. Dirt in the body at a given instant is a vector. But it's a function of position. If I took the dirt somewhere else, it's going at a different speed. I'm going to take another example of a vector here for our particular example with a block with temperature, and that's the heat flow in the block. If the block is here and the temperature, say, is high at this end and low at this end, cold and hot, then there'll be some flow of heat. The heat will run across the block. And I want to measure the flow. In certain places, the heat's flowing one way, in certain places another way. So it's a directional thing, the direction of the heat flow. So the first aspect of the vector heat flow is going to be its direction, and its direction is in the direction of the flow of the heat. And its magnitude will measure how much heat is flowing. But how much would we say flows if we took a different way of looking at it? Suppose we had an area, a surface this way at some angle. How much would flow per unit area through that surface? It's easy to see that all the heat that flows through the original thing flows through this, flows through here. So that this heat flows through a bigger area. It's less per unit area. Another way of looking at it is reversed. If you took a unit area of this surface, you see that that doesn't cover, that the heat that flows through there flows through less of an area at right angles by the cosine of the angle between the two surfaces. And therefore, the amount of heat which flows through arbitrary surface when the heat flow is in this direction is h times the cosine of the angle between h and a direction at right angles to the surface. We will always use n for a vector of unit length at right angles to surfaces. We call the normal vector. And then we have a thing, the thing here is this, that h dot n, or the component of h in the direction of n, is equal to the flow per unit area per second through a surface perpendicular to the normal n, or a surface who has a normal n. Well, that's the characteristics of the heat flow vector. I just wanted to illustrate an example of a vector in space. And now comes the central problem, which is the following. If we would like to describe the way these things vary in time, that's easy. We can differentiate with respect to time. But if we want to describe the relationship of the way the temperature is in one place to the way the temperature is in a nearby place, in other words, we start to think about the problem of differentiating the temperature with respect to position, because it differs in different places. So we start by analyzing the derivative of the temperature with respect to position. But we can differentiate the temperature with respect to x, or we could differentiate the temperature with respect to y, and so on. You know from the theory of vector analysis that if you take a vector and another vector and multiply them together like this and take that combination, you do produce a scalar. It's possible to demonstrate this, that if you did produce a scalar by such a combination in which b was known to be a vector, then the three numbers a must be a vector, which is nice and natural. So let's suppose we've proved that some way. Then we conclude that these three numbers are a vector. Well, we need a notation for this glorious vector, and so I write down what the notation is that everyone has used. They make upside down triangle times t to represent that vector. This thing is called, sometimes this thing is called del, so sometimes you'd say it's del t, but people call this particular combination also grad t, or gradient of t. It's a vector whose components are dt dx, dt dy, dt dz. So we have a general formula, for instance, that the difference of t of two infinitesimal points is equal to the component of gradient t, gradient t dot, the difference in distance. And now I'm going to do something that's extremely amusing, ingenious, and the characteristic that makes mathematics beautiful. The argument that this is a vector didn't depend upon what I was differentiating. What it told me is that no matter what I differentiate, if I write d dx equals d dx prime cosine theta minus sine theta d dy prime, and so on, the other equations, I didn't do the other two, which is d dy and so on, but they come out right, that this set of equations will be true no matter what it differentiates. As long as that's true, we don't write down what it differentiates. We let these things be written in the way Jean says, hungry for something to differentiate, but remaining hungry. And we consider it as an operation or an operator, which one of the operators is d dx, another operator is d dy, another operator is d dz. So if we imagine the following operator, a new idea, a vector operator, or an operator with three components. An operator becomes three other operators when you turn the coordinate system. Three-component operator. The three components are the x component of this operator is ddx, the y component of the operator is ddy, and the z component is ddz. In any other coordinate system, they rotate like a vector. So I can represent it with an arrow on the top with the standard rules about arrows, that when you rotate the coordinate system, you rotate the components in precisely the same manner as if it was an ordinary vector instead of being an operator. So we abstract the gradient away from the t. That's a brilliant idea. And with this brilliant idea understood, that is just abstracted away, an enormous amount of correct equations can be immediately written down. And I'll explain how that works. We understand that if we multiply a vector by a scalar, we get a vector. And this is no longer a hungry operator, but a completely satisfied operator, and is a physical vector. And has a definite sense, because we've already discussed the sense of it. It represents the rate of change of t. It represents this, that if t is changing from point to point, the component of this in the x direction is how far t changes when you move in the x direction. And what is the direction of grad t, incidentally? Inasmuch as the change in t in any direction, it's missing because it's erased, but the change in t in any direction is the component of the gradient in that direction. You remember if we multiply by delta on a given direction, we got the change. Since the rate of change of t, if you move in any direction, is the component of grad t in that direction, of course, if we get exactly in the direction of grad t itself, we get the maximum component. So the direction of gradient t is the direction in which t changes fastest. That's all entertaining enough, but now let's see if this business of abstracting the operator away from the vector will automatically produce for us physical sense other things. Well, it's easy enough to combine it with a scalar. Let's try combining it with a vector. We discussed a particular vector, which is a flow vector. There's 1,000 other vectors, the electric field in space, the velocity of a rotating object in different places inside the object, the speed of water flow inside of a tank that's sloshing around, and so on and so on. Now, this is of any vector at all. Now, this is also our operation. How can we combine the two so as to make things which are either vectors or scalars? In the same manner as we do in the algebra. We can combine two vectors to produce a scalar. So we can combine these two quantities to produce a scalar by putting a dot between. But again, one of them doesn't make sense, the other one does, because of the convention that the differentiations must appear in front of the thing that it differentiates. And so consider, therefore, the following dot product. Dot between two vectors, that must be a scalar. And what in the devil would it mean? Well, it means the following. If A dot B is a scalar, we know that in component form, it's the x component of A times the x component of H. You know, the x component of the grad times x component of H plus the y component, and so on. But what is this x component of the gradient? It's the operation ddx. So this thing is dhx dx plus dhy dy plus dhz dz. And this combination of things is invariant under coordinate transformations. It's the same in every coordinate system. It doesn't look the same. dhx prime, dx prime, dhy prime, dy prime, and so on. Doesn't look like it's equal to that, but it is equal to that. How do I? To find out when we want to differentiate things, we'll never find an equation that looks like this. dh dx with respect to y is equal to the heat is equal to q, or some kind of a physical equation like this. Because if someone else uses a different coordinate system, and if q is a scalar, a quantity that's the same in both, this thing won't mean anything. It'll be different in a different system. So our problem is really to find out what combination of derivatives has physically important sense, a geometrically important sense. And here's one. This combination is the same in every coordinate system. This particular combination, therefore, is an important one in physics. It appears all the time, and it's called the divergence. Well, it's unfortunate. Or maybe it's not unfortunate, it's handy in a way. It's not necessary. One could call this del dot H, and many people do. It's also called the divergence. So if you don't mind, we'll have to learn a few words to go with the things too. This kind of a thing is called the gradient. Well, the obvious other combination of these two things that we can form in order to form a vector, combine two vectors, is to combine two as the cross product, and this produces a vector. And sure enough, it's a vector, all right. But what does it mean in a sense? How do I define it? I can define it by telling you what the three components are. The curl of H, or this del cross H, has components. The Z component is equal to d dx of H sub y minus d dy of H sub x. Now, where does that come from? It comes from this. The Z component of the cross product of any two vectors is A sub x, B sub y minus A sub y, B sub x. So the two stages in which I would obtain this would be, I'd say, all right, this is just a vector. Then it would say, like the A over there, and it says A sub x times B. B is the H in this formula, B sub y minus A sub y, B sub x. And now I just remember that this isn't really, honest to goodness, an algebraic vector, but it's a grand vector operator, that the x component of the gradient is d dx, that the y component is d dy, and that the z component is d dz. And so by following the algebraic rules, learning nothing new, in other words, I get the correct formula for this combination del cross H. This combination happens to be called the curl of A. The reason for the names and the physical meaning of the combination, that's all there is to it. I have only to tell, I mean, that's when we can expect now at this level that the fundamental equations of physics, which when they're not referring to coordinate systems, will involve only combinations of divergences and curls and gradients. And I've written as an example the equations, just to show you what they look like, the Maxwell equations of Maxwell, which we're going to study all during this year. But you see that they are of the form advertised, that there's a divergence, there's a formula that tells you what the divergence of E is. It's equal to rho over epsilon 0. Rho is the charge per unit volume. In these equations, we've assumed not that the electrons are point charges, but that we're so on such a large scale that we can describe the average density of the charge. Or if you wish, if you want to describe electrons, we'll suppose electrons have a density over a very small sphere, and we take the limit of infinitesimal spheres, so that there really is a charge density. When the electrons move, there's a flow of electricity or a current flow. And then there's a formula for the divergence, for the curl, and so on, of E and B, all interrelated. So you see the physics equations involve just this symbol. And you can translate all those equations into components if you wish to find out what they mean in components. I'm always playing games with the blackboard.